Hi everyone. So, well, first off, thanks for joining this banking session, especially with gaming going on at the same time. Paul Smyth here. I head up digital accessibility for Barclays. Being vision impaired, let me try and describe myself. I guess I'm in my 30s. I've got brown hair. I'm wearing a black t-shirt. Don't actually remember what colour my eyes are. Oh dear, maybe green. And yeah, as Mark says, it's a real pleasure to be invited back. This is my 4th year speaking at TechShow Pro, and really just sharing with you some of the work that we in the Barclays accessibility and vulnerability teams have been doing. So, we've got an hour to do this. I'm joined by some great guests. So in about 10-15 minutes, we'll bring them in to hear from other banks and get their perspective on what they're doing. And really for this first hour, it's very much that. It's looking at what accessible banking means, what it means sort of before COVID, and what it means now in this COVID crisis in terms of how banks are serving, their disabled, older, vulnerable customers and supporting their workforce. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. To Mark's point, any questions that you do have, if you're watching this live, please do sort of send them through. And between Mark and I, we'll do our best to try and funnel those difficult questions to the lovely panel that we've got starting in about 15 minutes. But again, let me sort of start off and really level set and share with you some of the things we've seen and the things we've been working on at Barclays, if that's okay. So I really wanted to chat through sort of 3 stories with you today. I guess the first is to really do a recap, in case you haven't heard me talk about this in the past, what accessible banking services sort of means, before COVID, where we used to have to, put trousers on and go out and go to a bank branch. Things were different a few months ago. I wanted to share with you as well sort of some of the extra support and services that we've been putting in place to really support the immediate needs of disabled and older and vulnerable customers now in these challenging months. And really talk about how we're supporting our, our workforce through this time as well. So if that sounds like a plan, let me sort of rewind and recap in terms of the big picture at Barclays. So, we've had an active accessibility program for a number of years. We're serious and committed about it. We have an ambition to be the most accessible FTSE company. And it's heartwarming to hear so many of the businesses on the sessions throughout the day also sort of have that ambition. For Barclays, what does accessibility mean and why it matters? It's about ensuring that all people can use our products and services or be employed by us, regardless of their abilities, their situation, their circumstance. By leveraging inclusive tech, we can enable and empower all people to work, to bank, to reach their full potential. So, by leaning into accessibility, it helps us build a great experience for a greater number of people, and ensuring that our digital services, we don't leave out or leave behind anyone, that people can do their banking how, when, and where they want on their own terms. So that said, we have had a wide variety of accessible customer services that we've offered to a range of disabled and older customers to meet their nuanced needs. And let me just kind of recap a few of these. So again, to sort of aid everyone's understanding. So I guess when I think about customers with sight difficulties, historically, this was about offering paperwork in alternative formats. The session in an hour's time will really drill in on this. We offered talking ATMs to help people with sight difficulties or print difficulties like dyslexia to get cash out independently, really impactful. We offer high visibility debit cards as well to make it easier to make purchases and so forth. But equally important is making sure that our digital services, our mobile banking app, our online banking websites, are as accessible as they can be. And one of the main ways we do this is really partnering with AbilityNet and accessibility accrediting those key sites and apps to make sure that they're accessible for those who need it and really usable for everyone. So really important to us on that front. When I think about customers with hearing and speech difficulties, we offer virtual sign language interpreter services, and we also make sure that our other channels like instant messaging or maybe video banking, if I'm hard of hearing and reliant on lip reading, that we do user testing to make sure that these do work for hard of hearing folks. When I think about customers with mobility and dexterity difficulties, historically this was about making sure our high street bank branches were physically accessible, but more so now it's about making sure that contactless payments and it's seamless to buy things in shops and so forth, and making sure that the digital services we have have fewer clicks and bigger touch targets, so it's easier to use for this segment. When I think about customers with learning and language and literacy difficulties, having simpler security steps, being able to use your fingerprint or face recognition, really benefits this audience, but makes lives easier for the rest of us. And really visual money management tools to really help understand and manage and make the most of your money is really key here too. So not just seeing tables of transactions, but being able to drill in on and see retailer logos or locations to help people's understanding, so that they can better budget and make the most of the money. And I think really the fifth and final area is really around customers impacted by mental health. So we've done a lot of work making sure we're signposting to charity partners, to the experts who can help people, and putting in place gambling blocks to help customers with gambling addictions to pop on gambling blocks and have spending controls to really help them. So this is a sort of whistle-stop tour of some of the accessible support and services that we've offered over a number of years to really redefine what accessible banking means. But if I sort of step back and think about some of the trends that all banks would have seen in recent months, and I try not to depress everyone here, I'm an accountant, so I'm not going to talk through numbers, but it's really important that we've all got the sort of same sort of world view on this. So clearly, COVID has all impacted, our physical health, our mental health, but it's impacted, many of our financial health as well, right? For the millions of people who, might have lost jobs, might be furloughed and so forth, and might be worried about, an uncertain future. I think we've seen that, visits to bank branches have dropped massively. Using cash in shops and so forth has dropped massively. Maybe it's a germ thing. We've seen a massive reduction in discretionary spending, on luxury goods and so forth, as people sort of, hold their breath quite literally and sort of tighten their belts figuratively, thinking about, an unknown future. I wonder if it's just me, but, I'm sure when I walk down the road, I notice so many people holding their breath. It's just this thing. But anyway, back to thinking about those things have reduced over time. What have we seen go up? Well, I guess, massive accelerant in people using digital banking channels, websites and mobile apps, whoever you bank with. We've seen a huge increase in using contactless payments. And, the contactless limits in here in the UK has increased to £45, to really help with the COVID pandemic. And I guess we've also seen, a massive increase in essential spend, so doubling on supermarkets and so forth. But it's useful to add on that we've seen, sadly, a large increase in, fraud and scams. We've seen a large increase in the amount of spend on gambling as well, which are, areas that we're looking to address and tackle through, better training and digital skills and so forth on this front with our Digital Eagles programs. It's fair to say that some of us have used this time to declutter, to be more minimalist on thinking about what matters most to us and our families. Others have used this time with more time on our hands to do these sort of boring admin chores that we've always been putting off, switching utility providers or, consolidating the savings accounts that we've got, as suddenly saving seems like a good idea with an uncertain future. And, clearly all banks have done a huge amount over recent months that we've all seen in the mainstream media. So, things like waiving overdraft fees, around offering loan and mortgage repayment holidays, bounce back loans, and really supporting through financial assistance programs and teams those who are hardest hit in terms of financial hardship. And I'm not really going to cover on any of these points because I'm not really qualified to. So I really wanted to sort of talk about thinking about disabled, older and vulnerable customers, what more have we needed to do to respond to their needs of as a consequence of COVID? So to give you some ideas here, it's been really important to Barclays to proactively contact thousands of older customers, potentially vulnerable customers, to remind them that we're here for them and to help them do their banking, differently than they may have in the past. It's been important to us too to make sure that we can prioritise them. So if they were going to a bank branch and now they're using telephone banking, we can prioritise them as well as NHS workers and key workers, to fast track and sort of skip the queues as we've seen, large, queue times around telephone banking. We have millions of customers using our digital banking channels, and we've had millions more now as a result of recent months. We're getting some great feedback as more people using more journeys on our digital channels, and I'd really urge people, whoever you bank with, to make sure that you're providing that feedback if there's certain things that may not work for you as well as they can do. It's been important to us to actually create more simpler digital guides for people who are forced to use digital routes, and to kind of give them that assurance of how to do things. And equally important, we need to remember that people are still, might not use digital, they might be dependent on cash. So, really proud that we've made sure that a further 1,500 of our cash machines and ATMs, either in branch or outside of a branch, talk, so that people can get cash out independently, whilst social distancing and so forth through these times. But I think maybe one of the biggest areas that we've needed to focus on is really around supporting those shielding, and thinking about the 1.5 million, extremely vulnerable shielding customers, because I guess that this creates some challenges in the sense of, if family and friends or neighbours or a community do shopping on behalf of someone shielding, then we need to figure out and support them in ways that they can pay, and how carers can be paid for shopping and so forth. So one of the ways that we've addressed this is by offering cash delivery services to the doors of people who can't go out to get cash out from ATMs and so forth, so that they can keep budgeting and paying carers. And we've also offered volunteer shopping devices, so again a bit like a top-up card that people can top up with money and give to a carer to do shopping on their behalf in a slightly more secure way. And we're seeing a huge amount of innovation in this space around the extra things that we can do to support those vulnerable and shielding. And likewise, there's a huge amount of how we better spot and serve, record preferences around customers with accessibility and vulnerability needs, which I'm sure, the awesome panel we've got in a few minutes we'll cover off more. So this, hopefully sort of gives you a sense of some of those extra support and services to meet this moment. And I believe, that accessible customer service for me has always been about offering flexibility and choice and personalisation. But I think to meet this particular moment, it's about something more, and about being, businesses and brands being responsive and responsible. And I guess when I talk about responsible banking, that's around actually being there for society, for customers and the communities you operate within. So for Barclays, proud that we've launched a £100 million COVID community aid programme to support those hardest hit globally. And I think for the UK alone, that's about working with charity partners for those hardest hit vulnerable communities. So things like low income families, things like those impacted by financial hardship, elderly isolated people, and really supporting key workers through these difficult times. So this hopefully gives you a sense of some of the things that we have seen and done in Barclays. We're on a journey. There's a huge amount more ahead of us, and we're going to come on and unpack this a bit more as part of the panel. But again, hopefully that gives a whistle-stop tour. I think just taking sort of final minute just to talk around how we're supporting our workforce. And then again, we'll bring in the the Q&A panel. So real quick here, because I'm conscious about I'm out of time. In terms of supporting staff, we've seen as COVID first came in, providing workplace adjustments to those people not in their offices but at home was really important, and being proactive about that. We've seen an acceleration to move to more modern, more accessible platforms and tools like Microsoft Teams, what we're using now, and kudos to Microsoft. I think we've also seen, a second spike of not just colleagues with disabilities and access needs needing adjustments, but as COVID's lasted for longer, people who may have been using laptops on a sofa or bed or on a sort of awkward dining room chair actually needing adjustments. So it's been really important to us to help promote workplace adjustments to our wider workforce. And then of a final point, really around mental health, making sure that through these times we see the mainstream media of depression and anxiety doubling, and making sure that our wellness programs, the support we offer our staff, and making sure that we are surveying and checking in with them to see what more we can do to support them has also been really key. So hopefully, that sort of gives a whistle-stop tour of some of the things we've seen at Barclays. But I'd like to just move it along now and again get some great guests. I'm going to shut up and do less of the talking and ask more of the questions. So I'm hoping we can bring in Charlotte and Stephen and Gordon with the wizardry of tech. Aha. Yes, hello, I think I can see you. So let's kind of start off. Rather than being that awkward chair that does a rubbish job of trying to introduce people, I'd love you to do it because you're best placed, right? So hoping you can, tell a little bit about yourself, your role, and perhaps about, your organisation and how they've needed to sort of respond to COVID. So maybe ladies first, Charlotte, can we start with you and NatWest?
Firstly, thank you for having me along. And so my name is Charlotte Grannan. I work in the Customers in Vulnerable Situations team for NatWest, Royal Bank of Scotland and Ulster North. So just a little bit about my job role. It involves basically supporting our product design teams, looking after, as we're kind of making changes to our products and services, really understanding what we need to consider when we're thinking about vulnerable customers and vulnerability as they're going through that process change. I also spend part of my days working with our customers where we need to offer them additional support and working closely with teams that do a great deal of work within that space too. So if I think about what our organisation's been doing, so probably very sort of similar to yourself, Paul, before sort of COVID, I think if we even think back sort of 5-10 years ago, banking has changed dramatically just in terms of the way that people can access their money and their information much more freely available through sort of things like our mobile apps, through our online banking channels. And obviously we work towards making sure that we are complying with AA accessibility standards, making sure that our customers can access these through using the smart technology that's already built within these devices, which is great for our customers to be able to access. If I think sort of post-COVID, things that have been happening sort of similar to yourself as mentioned, we've got cash deliveries which have been going out to sort of our vulnerable customers. We've been doing the dedicated lines that our customers can come through to us, which has been invaluable, especially for some of those key workers that you mentioned, so social workers, NHS staff. We're also been doing outbound calling to our customers, so over the age of 60 and 70, we've been calling out to those customers to make sure that they are okay and if seeing what support that they need as they interact with us, and especially for those customers who are kind of predominantly using our branch channels, given the fact that obviously we were in a lockdown and limited kind of interactions within our branches. So that's been really, really key for us. We've probably similar to yourselves done lots of work within the innovation space, so our companion card has been really well received from our customers, which enables customers to top up, similar to the one that you mentioned. They can top up, put additional funds on this and give it to a carer to enable them to go out and to be able to use money. But I think COVID has just probably expedited some of these things within a digital space and making sure that digital is used by more sort of people, and I think we will see more and more of that as we go on, whether that's through COVID or other changes which happen as consumers get more used to kind of accessing information more freely.
Great, thanks Charlotte. And Stephen from Lloyds, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Stephen Busuttil and I head up the design systems team at the Lloyds Banking Group. For those who are visually impaired, I'm a guy in my early 30s with brown hair and a full beard too, and I'm actually colorblind, so my shirt I think is blue and possibly pink, but I can't guarantee that. And I'm sitting in a very moody, dark blue room at home. So as I said, I head up design systems, and the purpose of the design system is to ensure all digital customer journeys are built and delivered consistently and following standards. In our case, accessibility standards are the foundation of everything we do. They span from WCAG AA standards, as Charlotte mentioned, to readability standards, and also plain English writing for comprehension. The way we ensure our digital journeys work well with screen readers for visually impaired, or even with device-assistive technology. We regularly test each and every component, and we're talking about form fields and buttons and things like that, to ensure that they work for everyone. So really, we've always championed accessibility, in my case, digital accessibility, and set these really high standards for designers, engineers, and product specialists to follow when releasing work out to the public. However, COVID has allowed us to also focus on non-digital customers now, many of whom are elderly or not confident banking online. And we focused our efforts on supporting them and upskilling them to manage their money from the safety of their homes and outside of a branch. We've got things like the Lloyds Bank Academy also helping people upskill on their digital skills, and a dedicated phone line, a helpline for vulnerable customers, and also people referred to us by charity partners to, again, support them with their banking online. And in some cases, we've even sent them iPads because they didn't have a computer or a device of their own, to ensure that they're able to do their banking from the comfort of their home with our support.
Sure, great. Thanks for sharing, Stephen. Really useful point there about how banks are sort of stepping in around digital inclusion to give people the IT and skills, as well as making sure those digital channels actually work for them. So thanks for that. And last but not least, Gordon.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to Billy and everyone else for the invite along today. This is my first TechShare Pro conference. For visually impaired colleagues, I'm bald with a beard, which I'm male and a bit older than everybody else, but that's probably not the first time that's going to be said today. I've made an effort and put a shirt on for the first time in I don't know how long, which is blue and white striped, and I'm speaking from my living room in North London. So my job is not in the finance sector. I don't work for a bank. I work for an organisation called the Research Institute for Disabled Consumers. We've been around for over 50 years. We were part of Which back when Which was forming at the beginning. And what is, I think, unique and really exciting about the work we do, we have a panel of over 16, I was going to say 16,000, I wish, 1,600 disabled and older people who essentially want to work with businesses, with charities, with government to make products and services more accessible and more inclusive. That's why we exist. That's why the work we do is all about making the world more accessible and more inclusive for everyone. And the reason the panel is so important, because the people on the panel, it's Pan Disability, it's right across the UK. They really know what inclusion looks like and equally what exclusion looks like. And for us, it's really important that we have a very good relationship with the panel and equally with the organisations we work with, because in my experience, in the 2 years that I've been with RiDC, no organisation, nobody designs products or services willfully to exclude people. It's just that the insights that disabled and older people have don't often get involved early enough on in the process to help make things accessible for everyone right from the very beginning. RiDC is a user-led organisation, so my board of trustees all have lived experience of disability, and that's really important to us because it keeps the organisation grounded and focused in on our priorities. we've got three strands of work that we've been developing and focusing in on. One is digital and the interface between the technology and the individual itself, and trying to look at that journey and that experience of using a whole range of different digital channels. The other one is around transport, and transport is a perennial issue for disabled people and older people in terms of accessibility and using it. And we do a lot of testing of trains and stations and buses and stuff like that. And then the final one is around age, and as people get older and have disabilities but don't see themselves as disabled, it's trying to think of the world, how we respond to that change in society and in people. And I suppose the question is, what pre-COVID and post-COVID in terms of accessibility? Well, COVID for us in terms of an organisation threw everything on its head. As I said, our panel are our researchers, and they'll go out and visit train stations, and we'll interview them and have focus groups, and that all stopped overnight for all the reasons you can imagine. So it threw everything on its head for us. But a bit like Charlotte said, it expedited our need to be accessible and speak to our panel in different ways. And so we thought about, how do we tap into the experience that individuals are having throughout COVID, particularly in the early lockdown when there was so much unknown. So we conducted 4 waves of surveys trying to tap into the sort of social and economic and personal and mental impact that lockdown restrictions were having on individuals, and to track that over time. And I'll hopefully get a chance to speak a bit more about that in a while. But reading the analysis, what it did was throw into sharp relief what accessibility means when nothing is accessible for anyone, and just the impact of that has on how quickly that can move things forward. So I'm really delighted to be here and be part of this panel, and hopefully not speaking purely from a financial perspective, but just the perspective of the experience and the insights from disabled and older consumers. So,
well, thanks for that, Gordon. And yeah, reminder to folks watching this live, and again, if you do have questions, now you've met our lovely panel, and please do send them through, and I'm sure Mark will pipe them through to us. I've got a handful of ones lined up to get us started. So maybe, Gordon, I mean, let's kind of just continue that thread that you were talking about. For me, Research Institute Disabled Consumer, you sort of act as that voice of disabled people, of some of the added challenges that they've faced in terms of whether it's using their bank or whether it's just in general in terms of going out and buying stuff in this different world with, everything online and one-way systems and shops and so forth. So do you want to kind of unpack some of the kind of research findings, that you found of what are these trends, sort of challenges and opportunities for customer service?
Sure. Again, based on our research, I think you can summarize it all into the 3 R's. There was an immediate response to COVID, and then there was a reaction when people realized actually using online shopping for supermarkets and stuff it was very, very challenging for a lot of people to access. And then there was a retrofit. So things the information came through and people went back and tried to fix them. And you could see that through our research, where in the first wave of the surveys, people were very anxious, very concerned about getting delivery slots through shopping. But over time, the anxiety and concerns around online shopping dissipated, whereas other things became more of an issue and a concern. So whether that was through accessing medical services or prescriptions, that increased as time went along because those systems didn't react quite as quickly as shopping did. We also saw a massive impact in terms of people's mental health and the anxiety around physical activity. And I think you can't sort of, as you said earlier on, you can't underplay the impact of that on people's decisions and reactions and just their general well-being. And more recently, when the lockdown restrictions were lifted in the summer and a lot of the streetscape changed to make sure that it was safe, transport then became a bigger issue, and not just the ability to get on a bus or get on a train, but it was more about the streetscape and how things have changed around different accessibility on pavements and all of that. So it's been a very interesting ebb and flow of that respond, react, retrofit all the way through. But some of the barriers I think we came up with as well was certainly around the digital. And we've done some research that we released yesterday that showed that the use of apps and the accessibility of apps built into smartphones is a bit of a challenge for disabled people in a number of cases, and 40% of our panel have either trouble downloading or accessing apps and they'll just stop using them, which is fine if it's for shopping and things. Well, it's not fine, but when it's utilities and other sort of important areas where there isn't a lot of choice, or if choice is much harder to come by, that is certainly coming through as a big barrier. The other issues were around finances, as you mentioned before, but also accessing through the phone and those different communication channels. The other two very quick points that came through was that our panel are made up of obviously a range of different people. Some were shielding, some were on the government's vulnerable list, and some were not, but felt they should be. And that drove a different reaction and a different set of concerns and experiences. And I think that that's a big challenge, even as we're in this stage of COVID, is getting on those different types of lists to be supported. And that came through as a massive message through all those 4 waves. And we were getting response rates of 800, 900 people each time. So it was a very broad overview of things going on. And now, finally, we're seeing that the behaviors of others are the things that are driving a lot of anxiety and concern as well. So whether that's in transport or in shops in terms of social distancing, and whether or not people are acting in a responsible way, wearing masks, or just the built environment in different environments, or making people just less comfortable going out and therefore aren't. So it's a bit of a run through of it all, but there's definitely issues around digital inclusion, connectivity, and the thresholds about how you get onto all these lists for support.
Well, thanks for sharing, Gordon. And an important word for me as you were talking there was around vulnerable people, right? And I know many people, that word vulnerable has sort of put their back up, you know, in terms of shielding, and vulnerable meaning sort of medically vulnerable, or i.e. susceptible to COVID. But I guess in banking, the word vulnerable and vulnerable customers means something else. It's loaded. So maybe, Charlotte, let's sort of turn our attention to you. You know, you're a customer vulnerability lead at NatWest. We know that there's some new bank regulations coming in, certainly here in the UK with our FCA, around customers in vulnerable circumstances. So it'd be useful. Many of the folks you know, listening in will be very familiar with sort of accessibility, so around sort of disability and mental health, but vulnerability is something bigger and broader. So do you want to sort of help us join the dots of what it is, and maybe unpack in terms of what you're doing in more broadly in your vulnerability programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Financial Conduct Authority have introduced guidance to help drive change by providing clarity to focus firms' attentions on what they should do to comply with the FCA principles. So the principles are there to kind of help make sure that we're treating customers fairly and making sure that we are doing things responsibly. The FCA basically want to make sure that the fair treatment of vulnerable customers is properly embedded within firms' cultures, policies and processes. So what this means from us, if I look at it from a vulnerability perspective, we've been doing lots of different pieces of work. I think, as we've kind of already alluded to, there's been work that's happened due to COVID. So COVID could potentially be classed as a vulnerability because it can impact how you interact with your bank, how your day-to-day life is operating. And vulnerability is just a way of us almost kind of categorizing things to say it could be something that's maybe more permanent, which impacts the way that you kind of interact with your finances. It could also be something which is temporary, so it could ebb and flow in terms of you interacting with your bank. If I look at some of the things that we've been doing as a firm, just kind of looking at sort of what the vulnerability requirements are and making sure that we are doing what we can to help our customers and being a purpose-led bank. We've recently launched a £1 million fund for our domestic abuse victims through Safe Lives, and they're currently in a targeted pilot to reach groups for families who are in abusive homes and needing some additional support to get out of those situations. We've also been working with Citizens Advice Bureau, so we've just launched our referral service, which has gone live actually on the 16th of November, where we can do direct referrals into the citizens advice to look at things like income maximisation for customers. So how can we make the most of money? Are there things like benefits that we need to look at? Are there ways that we can consolidate things for customers? But enabling customers to have more of a holistic overview. Other pieces of work that we've been doing, so we've just done a partnership with GamCare, so we're currently working with the GamCare Advisory Panel and Committee, and we'll continue to contribute to discussions around financial institutions and how to best support problem gamblers. And we've also supported, we've been working with them on handover lines, so where customers need some additional support and help, we can actually do a handover and referral process. And the final one that we've been looking at is U3A. So this supports those affected by social isolation and loneliness, and embeds our kind of model to work with communities, and to kind of create central hubs to help people where they're going through sort of social isolation and loneliness. So as you can see, there's lots of work that is happening in regards to different elements of vulnerability. And I don't think vulnerability can just be, you know, categorized into sort of certain pots, because everybody can experience different types of vulnerability as they go and kind of go through their life. And I like to call it the roller coaster of life. It's not always as straightforward, you know, day to day for everybody, and things can happen which make things more difficult for people. So I think the guidance that we have got is just enabling us as companies to have a central kind of guidance and place to go to get that information, and to standardize it across the board for us all.
Right. Well, thanks for just explaining that. But it's such a broad spectrum that we're all vulnerable from time to time, and then it's not just this, disability and mental health, but it's all these other life events, or, you know, financial literacy, digital literacy, and so forth. All sort of plays into this sort of melting pot.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Stephen, let's kind of come back to you. So, you know, so you're design head of Lloyds Banking Group, and I guess one of the questions is, as it's going online, is how do you ensure that you know, your brand online is kept accessible, and how do, you know, how does sort of design systems help?
That's a really good question, and nowadays designing a brand and all the services around it absolutely needs to have accessibility at its core. Many times digital accessibility isn't considered, or at least it's not considered enough. So the choice of a typeface or the color palette and even art direction require upfront work to ensure that they work for people's different needs. And also I'd like to say that good accessible brands can still be beautiful, absolutely. With a little more upfront consideration, we just make sure it's beautiful in all its senses. You know, have you ever experienced a website where the typeface was really difficult to read? You know, we all know that some typefaces work really well and improve legibility, even some specifically for dyslexic people, for example. These kinds of accessibility decisions impact all of us, including people with no apparent accessibility needs. And then we've got colors. How do we pick a distinctive brand color, but one that also works for colorblind customers, for example? And this is an area of specialism for me as a colorblind individual, something which as a designer, I once hid, but now lean into as a way of improving services for others like me. And this year, for example, we completely rebranded Halifax from the ground up. We've got a dedicated brand team, but we worked with them as a digital design and accessibility experts to fine-tune some of the details to ensure it just fit for digital. And then, you know, to your point around design systems, Paul, we drew up every single user interface component from scratch, meeting the AA standards, and coded them into our design system to ensure that everyone used the same instance of a master component across our digital estate. And it's the first time we've done anything at this scale. So it just ensured that we had cohesive brand presence, which was done to a really high accessibility standard, but the level of cohesion also helps with things like building brand trust and also ensuring that customers feel safe, especially when identifying potential fraud, which may not execute the brand as it should be, and they could identify those differences.
Sure. Yeah, and you know, makes complete sense, David, on what you're saying about accessibility teams and brand marketing teams working together to make sure that things are pretty and polished, but also accessible and usable as well, not just in print, but on screen. And I think your point about sort of making sure the building blocks or components are themselves accessible, as many, you know, big businesses will have, you know, maybe potentially hundreds of sites and millions of pages. So trying to bake accessibility in at the kind of building block or component level is so key, so that accessibility can scale. Otherwise, you know, you always find, you know, a handful of issues on certain pages. So it's definitely the right way to go, to sort of shift left, make sure that designers, you know, are really thinking through an accessibility lens. So we've kind of touched on some of the help and support that's available, and it'd be useful just real quick to again sort of go around and make sure we kind of give some useful links in terms of where to go to find out about sort of help and support. So I don't know, Stephen, from the Lloyds side, if there's any particular, whether it's kind of website links or phone numbers that'd be useful just to pipe up with.
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, we've got a dedicated helpline for vulnerable customers. And these are also, again, people who are supported by our charity partners. And this was launched back in April, where we found that many elderly customers were struggling to adapt to online banking. And even people with poor digital skills or low trust for digital services really needed some help. And so far, I think we've actually supported over 7,000 people. As I mentioned earlier, some of them didn't even have a computer, and we sent out these 700 devices to the vulnerable elderly and focused on helping upskill them to bring their digital confidence up to a level where they could do their banking online. And this service remains available to everyone and will keep on running until at least Easter time next year. And then there's a second one, if I may. We've got the Lloyds Bank Academy, which you could look up online. And this website is focused on helping people with low digital confidence with their lives and their livelihoods. And again, since April, 65,000 people have completed bespoke training through our on-demand services. And I think there's something like 2,000 people who have joined interactive webinars. So all of this support material which we offer, there's new material for supporting younger people to build financial skills and improve their money management. There's so much on there. If you do get a chance, check out the Lloyds Bank Academy website, and I'm sure there'll be something to help you there.
Great. And Charlotte, from your side, useful support?
Yeah, there's loads of different support. So as mentioned, we've got our vulnerable customer care lines, which we've got dedicated phone numbers. I can share these after the call if it's useful to kind of share those, and also our contact for NHS and social care emergency response. So again, if anybody does want to use those are 24/7 assistance lines. We've also got loads of useful information which is on our website. So as you go onto our websites, there is a COVID piece which you can just click on, and it'll take you to all that really useful information. But the other ways that you can get assistance and help is speak to one of our colleagues, whether that's through our web chat assistance, whether that's through message us within our mobile app, or whether it's you know, going through to one of our colleagues in branches if you do feel that that's the way that you want to go. We are here to help, and we are here to serve, so please get in touch. I'll happily help you.
Sure, thanks, Charlotte. And I guess real quick from the Barclays side, I'd recommend if you do bank with Barclays, it's probably starting out going to barclays.co.uk/accessibility, or if you do have, you know, the app or website, give give Barclays a call, or we use the secure chat feature to again get in touch and see how we can help. So I'd like to bring in Mark now, because I'm conscious, we've asked the audience for any questions as we've been going along. I think we've talked lots about customer service, and it'd be useful to throw out to the audience if there are sort of any good example, good or bad experiences that folks have got in terms of what does great customer service actually look like. So whether it's banking, whether it's just in general buying stuff, then really keen to have your views. So please pop it down in the sort of chat window. Mark, any interesting questions come through?
Hi Paul, yeah, and hi panel. Thank
Yep.
you so much for helping out and being part of that. That was a fantastic discussion. So a couple of questions. The first one, I'm going to dive in on this one. It's right at the beginning. It actually was something you were saying, Paul, at the beginning. Do you think there's any link to business case for the activities that you're doing? Are you able to demonstrate any shift in terms of bottom line? That's true of all of you. In terms of the particular sort of services you're offering to vulnerable customers. And I guess, Gordon, you may have a view that the banks are winning customers because you're seeing research that shows they're more loyal, for example. So just linking it back to that business case, as opposed to practical actions. You've covered so many great things that you're doing. Are you getting support internally because people are seeing this move the dial in terms of profitability or sales?
Sure. Okay, I mean, I'll go first, and again, sort of lovely panelists, if there's anything else, please feel free to chime in. I think from our side, so we run customer satisfaction scores, disabled and older customers, over a long period of time, and I guess by making sure that our digital services are, accessible, that we give the best experience to the broader bunch of people possible. We've clearly seen that as these difficult times, as people are encouraged or forced to use the digital channel, as doing things physically in bank branches is more challenging. It hasn't impacted some of those customer satisfaction scores maybe as much as we'd thought, right? So it kind of goes back to that point that by investing in accessibility programs, it means you're able to support those customers that would otherwise have kind of fallen off a cliff. If they, couldn't use the digital channels so much. So I guess that's kind of one point in terms of, the kind of business benefits. And again, some of the points, it's almost re-emphasizing what I would have talked around in this morning's session, really about recognizing, the spending power of disabled people, right? The 274 billion. Sort of purple pound of them and their households and families. So at the moment, so recognizing that they are growing, the sort of fastest growing minority group, and a really sort of influential bunch. So whether that's who they shop with and who they bank with, it's really important to make sure that we're kind of meeting the additional needs that they have. And I think for me, it's important, as we've heard from all the panelists, about what banks are doing to kind of meet the immediate needs of vulnerable customers, in general, which could include disability and mental health, but could include all these other things that are kind of around our circumstances. Panelists, anything else to add around the kind of business benefit of kind of doing all this work in accessibility and vulnerability programs?
If I might very quickly just respond, we don't have a figure that is easily translatable to say you invest in accessibility and your market share, your bottom line will increase by this. There is research that shows that if you get it right, disabled people tend to be, and it's a very reductive view, but more loyal, because what would be inconvenient for a non-disabled person is really scaled by 10 the impact it has if something's not accessible for a disabled person. And therefore, if it is designed and made accessible from the very beginning, you bake in that loyalty. But we do see, when we're working with clients across the range, there's a multitude of reasons why they want to hear the voice of disabled and older people and build that into their business processes. Sometimes it's regulation, sometimes it's the leadership has had a personal link with a disabled person or something in their life that was brought into sharp relief the challenges of inaccessible products and services, or sometimes it is just trying to gain market share and be different and be better. But I think really the business case is simple. If you exclude 20% of the population, you're excluding 20% of a market. So why would you not try and design something for everyone from the very beginning? But I would say that that's sort of that's what we try and help businesses achieve.
Yeah, Paul, just from my perspective, obviously as a bank, we're working on a purpose-led strategy, so championing potential, helping people, families and businesses to thrive. So if our customers and our communities and our economy succeed, ultimately we will succeed too. And I think that is very true. I also try to think about it from my own personal perspective. You know, if I look at things like my dad's had recent eye operations, you know, he's needed some assistive technology. Had he not probably known me and I was able to help him, assist him with those things, he probably wouldn't have thought of those things. And I always try to think about the fact that we are not getting any younger. We are always an aging sort of population, and eventually, you know, we will need different types of accessibility and different ways to kind of access banking, whether that's through, you know, ill health, whether that's through accidents. You know, these things can happen to any of us at any time. So I think it's about thinking about the long term as much as it is about sort of the here and now.